I'll tell this straight. I never expected an engagement party to feel like crossing a border into someone else's country. My name is Maya Collins, and my husband Jonah and I drove our 2 kids up from Vermont in a car that still smelled faintly of pine needles and campfire. Jonah writes about birds and bogs for a living. Quiet, precise pieces that make him smile like he's found something secret in the grass. People call him a nature writer. People also call him a lot of things that aren't him. We dress practically. Good wool coats, sturdy boots, the kind of clothes that refuse to call attention to themselves, but look damn fine when you care for them. That's the baseline of our life, and for the 3 of us, it's been enough. My brother Liam invited us. Liam, whose voice still sounds like home even after a decade of talking business on the phone. He'd brought someone new, Evelyn Price, and the party was at the house she and Liam were renting. A wide, manicured place in Riverside with more marble than the Vermont Library has books. You could tell the house had been waiting for the right people to approve its furniture. It had that special, confident silence of rooms that have never been used for anything practical like spills or homework. We drove in under a canopy of lights. A man in a blazer took our coats with the practiced indifference of someone whose job is to make you feel small in the most polite way possible. People drifted through the rooms like they were trying not to disturb each other's status. I tried not to notice the crystal glinting in every direction and focused on Liam, who hugged me like he'd been starving for human contact. He introduced me. Maya, Jonah, the kids. The guest answered with a smile that landed halfway between pleasant and evaluating. Evelyn arrived like she'd been expected by the architecture itself. She wore a dress that seemed to have been designed to make everyone around her feel slightly less. When she hugged Liam, it felt private and serious in a way that made me step back. She took one look at Jonah's coat and then at my children, Leah and Max, and the muscles around her mouth made a hard little decision. Vermont is lovely, Evelyn said, with that tilt that tries to be inclusive but is actually a price check. So rustic, so authentic. There are tones in speech that are compliments folded into inventory checks. My friend calls them backhanded kindnesses. This was one of them. We laughed it off at first. Liam had always been the kind to marry into people with different vocabularies. But as drinks were poured and the trays kept circulating, Evelyn's tone took on a pattern. She complimented Jonah's coat in the way someone might commend a rare specimen. An interesting choice, she said, eyes flicking down. Very practical. It has character. She lingered on the word. People around her laughed politely when she made a joke about country chic, like a soundproofing layer that keeps discomfort from leaking into the conversation. My smile hardened into something that told the kids I was fine, even while the corners of my mouth clenched. The kids felt it too. Leah, always the brave one, went to the hors d'oeuvres table and reached for a pastry. A woman in a pencil skirt, who had the kind of manicure that could double as an accent, leaned over and said, loudly enough for the room to hear, "How cute, bringing your own appetite to a grown-up party." Her voice had the soft cruelty of someone who confuses observation for truth. Max, who's 7 and thinks the best questions are the ones that are obvious, asked whether the fountain in the foyer was fake. Another guest, an older man whose tie looked like it cost a small mortgage, patted Max's shoulder as if discussing an exhibit. "Good eye, young man. Looks very staged, doesn't it? Like a museum trying to be alive." Those small things added up like frost. The barbs weren't sharp, nothing that would hold up in court or on a list of offenses, but they sat in the throat. My mother would have called them pinpricks, designed to remind us we were from the wrong zip code. Jonah tightened his jaw and looked at me in that quiet way that meant he saw exactly what was happening and was counting his breaths before he acted. Liam came between conversations, like he was apologizing without saying the word. "They're just joking," he kept telling me. And I wanted to believe him, because I wanted to believe there was some version of the room where love could cover a social lapse. The problem is, when jokes are always on you, they stop being jokes. Evelyn's comments became a private commentary threaded into public sentences. She asked, loud enough for the room, whether my children were homeschooled or in some kind of outdoor academy. And when I said they went to the local school, she made a little huh that was equal parts curiosity and dismissal. She admired Jonah's hands as if someone who writes about mud might have interesting hands. "They get into things," she said with a laugh that expected me to join and didn't plan for my absence. It's strange how quickly a body learns to protect itself. I found my hands folded in my lap, not because I was cold, but because I was practicing calm like one pats a tight knot into something softer. Leah tried to keep smiling. Max began asking to go stand near Liam, who offered them a grin and a slice of gentle nonsense. Stories about vacations that made my throat ache with the ordinary kind of luck we all hope someday for. We stayed long enough for the pain to become a background hum. I kept thinking of Jonah's hands steady at the edge of a book page, of his small, stubborn insistence on naming the creatures he loved. That insistence was a kind of dignity, one that didn't advertise itself. It soothed me. Still, by the time the evening wound down and people moved toward the door with practiced contentment, my skin had the feel of someone who has learned to carry a small hot coal inside a pocket without blinking. We left with our coats and our dignity, both a little rumpled. As the valet closed the door of our car, a woman called out, meant to be friendly, meant to slide the evening into a neat bow. "Well, safe travels to the country, darlings." The word country landed like a token dropped onto a table. Jonah started the engine. Leah and Max sang a little, oblivious and blessedly loud, and I watched the mansion recede in the rear view, its lights like a constellation built for a different sky. I did not know then what Jonah knew, and I did not know what Liam and Evelyn thought they could get away with. What I felt was a slow, inevitable gathering. Like a storm you can see across the fields, audible only because of the silence it promises to break. He didn't do it in a flare of trumpets. That's what made it worse, and better. Jonah has a way of being quietly inevitable, like a weather system that doesn't announce itself so much as rearrange furniture. We'd barely pulled away from the driveway when my phone buzzed. A text from Liam. "Can we talk?" He'd always used the ellipsis when he was nervous. I thought maybe Evelyn had apologized, or maybe he'd finally noticed the way she'd looked at us. Instead, when I answered the call and put it on speaker so Jonah could hear, Liam's voice came from the other end, thin and breathless. "Jay, are you sitting?" "Evelyn, things. There's paperwork. You should see this." Jonah folded his hands over the steering wheel and said nothing. He listened. Then he reached into the glove compartment and took out a slim, battered notebook he'd carried since grad school. He didn't need to be dramatic about it. His hands had always been the same plain, those decisive hands I loved, the hands that could steady a bird in the palm of his mitt, and the hands that apparently could steady the ledgers of a corporation. He tapped the phone with a thumb. "Liam, meet me at the house. We'll come back. Tell Evelyn to stay." We turned the car around. The driveway felt like a stage when we walked back up it. Guests had thinned, but a scattering remained. Somebody for cigars, somebody for the late wine. Inside, Liam met us with an apology already worn into his face. Evelyn hovered like a prop on a string, her smile trying to pretend curiosity when you could see the calculation behind it. Jonah didn't escalate. He didn't need to. He walked straight to the fireplace where Liam had been telling guests about the renovations and set the notebook down with the casual firmness of someone returning a borrowed book. The renovations were mostly cosmetic, Jonah said, as if we'd all been talking about wallpaper. The room cocked its head. He told them who he was. It was the one sentence that landed like a dropped coin. "I'm Jonah Collins. I'm the chairman and majority owner of Ironwood Holdings, the company that owns this property." He kept his voice level, the same plain tenor I had fallen asleep to beside for the last decade. There was a little ripple, confusion first because he'd always been the guy who wrote about marsh wrens. And then a different sound, the sound of people catching that they had misread a person. Evelyn's eyebrows did a practiced climb. Liam's mouth made a small, animal noise. A woman who'd been dangling a napkin like it was a prize straightened as if pulled by an invisible thread. "You own Ironwood?" Someone asked, like you might ask whether it was spring or winter. Jonah nodded. "Ironwood owns the property. And yes, we also handle leases through our property management." He opened the notebook, But the words on the page were not necessary. The sentence had tilted the space already. We've been tracking leases for the district. I noticed the agreement on this house is irregular. The rent charged here is a fraction of market. My team tells me it's been subsidized well below what comparable properties fetch. Evelyn laughed then, small and brittle. We have a deal with, she began, but Jonah's eyes were the kind that read people's intentions like weather maps. It wasn't a deal, Jonah said. It was an arrangement. One that benefited you, yes, but which wasn't disclosed to our board. It's not ethical. It's not defensible. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. He said the words like a person reading a conclusion from a paper he'd spent years compiling. Liam tried to speak up, to explain about favors, about friends in development, about an agreement signed a long time ago. Jonah listened. When Liam finished, Jonah folded the notebook closed and looked at him like he was looking at a younger brother who'd misplaced his moral compass. You have 30 days, Jonah said. Your lease will not be renewed. I felt something in my chest shift, like the moment a dam starts to whisper. The room made a collective noise then, a stifled gasp, the shuffle of feet, the sound of party people reaching for their social scripts and finding them gone. Evelyn's face flexed through the stages. Disbelief, outrage, then that thin, manufactured calm she wore at the door. You can't do that, she said, teeth even. There are children here. Jonah's jaw tightened the faintest degree. I can. I will. The property is mine to manage. We'll work with you on a timeline and assist where reasonable, but the decision stands. 30 days. He let the number hang, absolute and tidy like a piece of finished wood. There was an argument about legality and precedent and who had made what promise to whom. People who had been laughing 10 minutes earlier rearranged their laughter into expressions of appalled interest, the social equivalent of leaning in. Someone said it was cruel. Someone else said it was justified. The moral calculus in that room was a pendulum swinging between two banked truths. People who profit from appearances and people who live quietly with real work. I felt both sides at once, a messy double exposure of loyalty and vindication. Liam's shoulders slumped. He'd been successful in ways that made us proud and shallow things at once, with the house, with the reputation. But you could see the tiredness at the edge of him, the kind that comes from always having to be a man who performs success. Evelyn's jaw worked. The children, our children, who'd been already primed by the evening's small humiliations, watched everything with the wide, bright curiosity of the uninitiated. Leah clutched my hand like an emergency anchor. Jonah didn't gloat. He didn't turn it into a public spectacle beyond the fact of speaking plainly where obfuscation had been the currency. He simply named the wrong, the subsidization, the unreported benefit, and then enacted a consequence. There was something surgical about it. The naming, the removal of the lease, the 30-day window that felt cruel only because it was concise. When he was finished, Jonah gathered the family like a quiet tide pulling back. He didn't shout triumph. He didn't need to. We walked out of the room with our coats in our hands and a new gravity sitting between us. Liam followed us to the steps and tried to say something that would stitch the moment back into ordinary life. He started apologizing, the words spilling like loose objects. I don't know what he expected. Forgiveness on a timeline, perhaps. I don't know what Evelyn imagined would happen when you pass a life off as earned and it's not. I know only that Jonah had decided on a kind of justice that matched the wrong. Plain, unavoidable, and public. As we left the house for good that night, I felt a complicated heat rush through me. There was a fierce, hot pride, partly at Jonah, who had revealed something I'd never known about him, and partly at the fact that someone was finally naming the cost of living by pretense. But there was also a small trepidation, because family lines had been redrawn without conversation, and because Liam, who'd been my brother by the axis of my life, now wore a new exhaustion, as if his seams had been pulled. We drove home with the windows cracked against the night. Leah and Max fell asleep in the back seat, their faces soft and unbothered by spreadsheets and shareholder meetings. Jonah glanced at me once, and there was a weight in his gaze that didn't ask permission. We both knew things had changed. The world had revealed more of its angles to us, and we had, for the first time in a long time, decided to walk them straight. We drove the rest of the way home in a quiet that felt like someone had turned the lights down on the world. Leah and Max slept against the back seat like two small, exhausted satellites. The car hummed, their breaths tiny metronomes. Jonah kept one hand on the wheel and the other on the knob between us. An old habit, a kind of compass. When the highway thinned and the town signs slid by, he spoke without turning his head. "People confuse wealth for a show," he said. "Like a bird puffing its feathers to look larger. That's not wealth, that's performance." He sounded exactly like he does when he's explaining something simple and beautiful, the buffet of language he reserves for the things he loves. Real wealth is quieter. It's the work that makes the nest warm, not the peacock tail that dazzles for a while. Leah stirred and mumbled something about the mansion lights. Jonah smiled at her in the mirror. "Those lights were pretty," he said. "Pretty doesn't make you better. Pretty is easy to borrow." He reached back and smoothed her hair. "Class is what you do when no one's watching. Dignity is how you treat people at their worst, not how loudly you announce your good fortune. Authenticity is risking being plain for the sake of being honest." Max woke up at that. He's allergic to anything slippery or dishonest, and asked, in that blunt way children have of cutting through adult fog, "So are we poor?" Jonah let out a breath that was half laugh, half steadiness. "We have what we have. We're rich in things that matter. We tell the truth, we fix what's broken, and we make room. That's different from being flashy. You can be comfortable and kind, poor and noble, wealthy and ugly. What I want you to learn is to be the kind of person who's good when no one is applauding." When we pulled into our driveway, the house felt like an old friend. Dented mailbox, porch light with a slight wobble. The kind of place that answered back when you knocked. Jonah carried the kids inside one by one and put them to bed like a ritual. I watched him move around the kitchen afterward. He straightened a chair, wiped a counter, fixed the loose knob on the cupboard. Small labor, invisible to anyone visiting, enormous to the life those small acts supported. We sat at the kitchen table with mugs that had long since lost their original color. Jonah looked at me and said, simply, "I wanted them to know who we are without our costumes." He didn't say it like a victory. He said it like a map being handed to someone lost. I thought about Liam ascending and then faltering under the weight of keeping up appearances. And I thought about Evelyn, who'd never felt the nervous thrill of a wren's nest in her palm. The world had a new axis now between us, but for the first time in a long time, the axis was honest. In the morning, there were messages from family and a thin spill of gossip through the neighborhood. Liam called. His voice was rawer, quieter, as if a piece of him had been polished off. He asked to come over. Evelyn sent something sharper that I didn't read twice. I made coffee and put a plate of pancakes on the table because that's how you rebuild, with simple, repeatable goodness. When Liam arrived, he didn't bring excuses, only a tiredness that smelled like someone who'd finally decided to unpack. We talked, really talked, in the way people do when they choose to stop pretending the script can cover everything. He looked at Jonah and at me and said, "I lost the plot." That's all he needed to say. Confession makes room for repair. It won't be instant. Consequences linger like winter's last ice. But there was, at least in that kitchen, at that table, with syrup and sunlight, an unadorned kind of reconciliation starting. Not theatrical, not triumphant, useful. That night, I walked to the end of the lane and watched a tiny wren hop along the hedgerow. It didn't try to look like anything other than what it was. Small, fierce, exact. Jonah came out, leaned on the fence beside me, and together we let the quiet mean something. The mansion's lights were far away, a constellation built for other skies. In our house, the lights went on when it was time to eat, bedtime was enforced with soft authority, and apologies were measured in actions the next morning. That was enough. It was more than enough.